She almost left her husband for a richer man. And if that's all you took from the story, then I honestly think you missed the most heartbreaking part. Because when I finished watching this film, I wasn't thinking about the rich man. I wasn't thinking about the gifts. I wasn't even thinking about the temptation. I kept thinking about a young husband standing in the ruins of a future he thought was already his. I kept thinking about a young wife trying to make sense of a life she never agreed to. And I kept thinking about how quickly people judge what they don't understand. Now, let me explain, right? The story begins with two young Nigerians, fresh out of uni, fresh out of NYC, young, hopeful, in love, the kind of love that still speaks in future tense. We'll build, we'll grow, we'll have children, we'll be okay. And honestly, watching them at the beginning felt almost unfair because they looked like every young couple standing at the edge of possibility. No scars yet, no disappointments, yet just dreams, big dreams. Now, the husband believes he is about to start managing his late father's business, right? That's the story. Not because he's guessing, not because, he's hoping, but because his uncle has told him so. Get married, show me that you're responsible, and the business is yours. Simple. At least that's what, he believes. And this is important because I don't think this young man was trying to trick anybody. From what I watched in this movie, he genuinely loved this woman. I believe he would have married her anyway. But, there was one detail he kept to himself. He never fully explained that this inheritance was part of why the timing suddenly mattered. And I paused when I realized that because sometimes the things we don't say creates more damage than the things we do. But we'll come back to that in a minute. For now, let's stay with this man because after the wedding comes the moment he has probably imagined 1,000 times. The moment he goes to claim his father's legacy. Can you picture it? Yeah, picture it. A young man walking towards the future he has spent years believing in and working towards. Not just a business, a beginning, a foundation, a way to provide for the woman he loves, a way to honor his father, a way to step into manhood with confidence. And then, in a matter of moments, everything collapses. The business is gone, mismanaged by this uncle, destroyed, nothing left. His uncle is leaving for the UK. The promises are empty. The future he thought he was waiting, that was waiting for him simply isn't there. And I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that. Not losing something you had, though. Losing something you were certain was coming because these two things are not the same. Now, there is a particular kind of heartbreak attached to almost. Almost got the job, almost bought the house, almost had the baby, almost made it, almost. And that's what hit me as I watched this scene. This young man wasn't grieving money, he was grieving an almost. The life he had already started living in his imagination, the life he had already introduced to his wife, the life he genuinely believed was theirs, gone, just like that. And here's where the story gets even more painful because while he's grieving the future he thought he could provide, his wife is also grieving the future she thought she had married into. Notice the difference? He's grieving the life he thought he could give. She's grieving the life she thought she would receive. And that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. They are standing in the same marriage, experiencing the same circumstances, yet mourning completely different losses. He feels betrayed. She feels disappointed. He feels humiliated. She feels uncertain. He feels like a failure. She feels like the ground beneath her has shifted. And suddenly, two people who love each other are carrying pain that the other person cannot fully see. Then came the scene that completely changed the way I viewed the story. She overhears a conversation. And in that moment, she realizes that there were things she didn't know before she got married. Important things. Things that might not have changed her decision to marry him, but should have been hers to know. And I remember sitting there thinking, this isn't about money anymore. This is about trust now, because healthy relationships aren't built only on love. They are built on transparency. The husband wasn't malicious. At least I didn't see him that way. If anything, I think he was trying to carry too much by himself, trying to protect her, trying to solve everything, trying to make sure everything worked out before involving her. But here's what life keeps teaching us. Secrets that are meant to protect often end up creating the very wounds they were trying to prevent. And suddenly I realized something. The real betrayal in the story wasn't the rich man. It wasn't even the uncle. It was the silence, the things left unsaid, the conversations postponed, the assumptions that were allowed to grow, because everybody deserves the dignity of making informed decisions about their own life. Then enters the boss. And this is where most people watching, this movie made a turn that I didn't. They focused on him, I focused on her because she was exhausted. Because by this point, she isn't just struggling financially, right? She's also grieving. And I don't think enough people talk about grief when nobody has died. Because grief isn't only about funerals. Sometimes grief is waking up beside a future that looks nothing like the one you planned. Sometimes grief is watching your timeline disappear. Sometimes grief is mourning a version of your life that never happened. And that's where she was. The boss simply arrived at the exact moment her disappointment was loudest. And that's what made me think, was she really attracted to her boss, or was she attracted to what he represented? Security, stability, predictability, relief, because those are very different things. And if I were honest, many people don't leave relationships because they found somebody better. Honestly, many people become vulnerable because they are exhausted. Exhausted people don't always make decisions from desire. Sometimes they make decisions from pain. Thankfully, this story doesn't end the way many people expect. And I want to be careful here, because I don't think the lesson is that she ignored her needs and chose her marriage anyway. No, that's far too simplistic. What I saw here was something much more human. I saw a woman who eventually realized she still had something worth fighting for in a marriage. Not a perfect husband, not a wealthy husband, not a husband who got everything right. A good man, a wounded man, a man who had been betrayed too, a man who had made mistakes but was willing to acknowledge them, a man who was still trying. And I think that's what changed everything. At some point, she stopped seeing only her pain. She started seeing his. And at some point, he stopped trying to carry everything alone. That's the man. And started letting her in. And that's when the story stopped being about money. It stopped being about temptation. It stopped being about the boss. It became about whether two wounded people could find their way back to each other. And that, honestly, that's the question that stayed with me longer than the movie ended. What happens when the future you agreed to disappears? What happens when the life you planned dies before it ever gets the chance to leave? What happens when two people are grieving different losses inside the same relationship? Because maybe the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never experience disappointment. Maybe they are the ones where both people eventually learn how to face disappointment together. And perhaps that's the real tragedy of this story. Not that a woman almost left her husband for a richer man, but that two people had to lose the future they imagined before they learned how to truly see each other. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.